Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton have come together again at the Italian Grand Prix. It's the second major incident between the two drivers in just 5 races. And both of these crashes have been hugely controversial, with the F1 fanbase being split on who was to blame. On this occasion, the stewards placed the blame on Max Verstappen, so does the Dutch driver need to change his approach to beat Lewis Hamilton in 2021? Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. In this video I'll assess Max Verstappen's title challenge to this point in the season, and the key incidents that have happened between Verstappen and Hamilton. I'll then look at whether Verstappen needs to change his approach to end up coming out on top come the end of the season. But before I get into it, I just want to remind you that this is my opinion on things, so if I say something you disagree with, then that's fine. Let me know in the comments, but be sensible about it. And as always, if you enjoy the video, then please hit the like button, and if you're new to Behind the Drive, then please consider subscribing. Max Verstappen's first title challenge. It emerged very early on in 2021 that Max Verstappen finally had the right machinery to potentially challenge for the championship. All the way back in March, when the teams were forced to complete their pre-season testing in just 3 days, it quickly emerged that the Mercedes car was struggling with the tweaks to the regulations, and the Red Bull chassis, coupled with the upgraded Honda power unit, looked like the strongest setup of all. But at the time, we didn't know whether this form would last, or if Mercedes had been hiding their true pace, as they have done on many occasions in the past. Once we saw the first competitive running in Bahrain though, it became clear that there was a potential title challenge for Red Bull as Verstappen took pole position by almost 0.4 of a second. This was a clear marker that this year wouldn't be quite as straightforward for Mercedes as the season champions would have wanted. It also showed that it would be Verstappen and Hamilton who would battle it out throughout this season as the clear favourites for the Drivers' Championship. Since then, the championship has seen a bit of a back and forth between the two teams and drivers as to who has the faster car. And this ebb and flow nature of the season has had the spotlight on it, as the media has kept a keen eye on the development race. This development race, combined with the restricted budget of the teams and the new regulations on the horizon, means that it's more important than ever to get the balance right between the two seasons. The gap between Hamilton and Verstappen has been a maximum of 32 points after the Austrian Grand Prix in July, and at that point in the season it looked like Verstappen could start to run away with the championship, with Red Bull continuing to develop their car and Mercedes opting to switch their development focus to 2022. It was also where Verstappen put in some of his strongest performances of 2021, where he just scored a hat-trick of race wins from France and then on to the 2 races at the Red Bull Ring. It was a series of fantastic performances which allowed him to build up his lead in the championship, and this is where, in my opinion, Verstappen was at his best. He was in a class of his own in Austria and benefited from some great tactics and strategy from the Red Bull pit wall in France. So by this stage in the season, he was starting to stretch his legs at the front of the championship. But it was at Silverstone that things would start to change. The incidents between Verstappen and Hamilton. As you'd expect from two drivers battling it out for a championship, Hamilton and Verstappen have come together on a number of occasions in 2021. To run through these, we first need to head back to just the second race of the year. The first contact made between the two was at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix at Imola. In the wet conditions, Verstappen was coming from 3rd on the grid and had a great launch to be in a position to overtake Hamilton for the lead into the opening chicane. Here, Verstappen moved to the inside line and held that racing line through to the exit of turn 2, which is where he made contact with Hamilton, damaging the Mercedes driver's front wing and sending him over the curbs in the process. This move was put down as a racing incident, but it was Hamilton that was forced to yield after ending up on the outside of the chicane, leaving the Brit with some minor aero damage. In the grand scheme of things, this incident at Imola was relatively minor compared to what we would see throughout the rest of this season, as the championship fight would get closer and tensions would rise. What's interesting about this minor scuffle though is the behaviour of the drivers. Verstappen took the racing line and gave Hamilton the choice of either having a crash or bailing out onto the curbs, and this is the start of a theme that would emerge in some of the other incidents during 2021. A couple of races later, and there was another relatively controversial move into turn 1 at Spain. Here, again, Verstappen was chasing down Hamilton at the start of the Grand Prix and had the speed to get past the Mercedes. The Red Bull driver dived down the inside line and again followed the racing line despite Hamilton being alongside him. On this occasion, the pair didn't make contact, but the move forced the Mercedes driver to take evasive action or have a crash. So again, much like the Imola incident, it was Hamilton that was given the decision to either crash or bail, and again, the British driver chose the latter. The next incident came at the 10th round of the championship at Silverstone. This was the most controversial incident of the season so far, particularly due to the outcome of the crash. Heading into Copse, it was Hamilton heading down the inside, meaning he was on the inferior line and failed to get his car to the apex of the corner. As Verstappen came across the track on the more traditional racing line, while still leaving space for Hamilton, the two made contact, with Hamilton's front left hitting Verstappen's rear right and sending the Red Bull driver out of the race into the barrier in what was a pretty terrifying high speed and high impact shunt. It was the first time that an incident between the two drivers had left one of them out of the race, and boy was it controversial. It was a situation where both drivers had the choice to bail out of the move or give each other more space, and ultimately the stewards penalised Hamilton as they determined he was more at fault for not utilising the space on the inside that Verstappen had left him. It was a risk from Hamilton in particular as he went for an overtake at a high speed corner with a maximum fuel load on board. So it was the British driver that was the one who gave Verstappen the choice to either leave more space or crash. But regardless of your thoughts on this controversial incident, it was obviously Max Verstappen who lost out here the most. His 32-point lead in the championship was cut to just 8 that weekend, with a 24-point swing in favour of Hamilton overall. Had the Red Bull driver conceded that position in that moment, he would have, at worst, faced a 7-point swing, and at best had an opportunity to fight back and potentially retake that position from Lewis through the rest of the Grand Prix, especially given the Red Bull car was looking particularly strong in race trim on that Sunday afternoon. So this is where, even with Hamilton's penalty, Verstappen was the one to come out worse on this occasion. Moving on to the Italian Grand Prix, and the pair of drivers had 2 incidents in a single race. The first of these came on lap 1 into the second chicane, where Hamilton took the outside line in an attempt to overtake Verstappen. He got alongside the Red Bull, but got forced out wide with his front left tyre locking before Lewis bailed out of the corner and over the runoff area. This one was left without investigation, but again, it was another situation in which Verstappen held the racing line, forcing Hamilton to either have a crash or bail out of the situation. And once again, the 7-time champion chose to keep his chances open for the rest of the race and head across the curbs. This is a crucial one for Hamilton, as he knew that the race around Monza would give him an opportunity to claw back some points, and that he had work to do following a disappointing sprint qualifying event the day before. But following a pair of disappointing pit stops for both Red Bull and Mercedes, the two drivers ended up on the same piece of track again later in the Grand Prix. As Hamilton exited the pits, he was right alongside Verstappen going into the first chicane, with the Dutch driver aiming to go round the outside into turn 1. Now it's worth mentioning here that the first chicane at Monza is significantly tighter than the second, but Hamilton followed a very similar line to the one Verstappen had taken earlier in the race at the second chicane. Hamilton had the inside and ensured he shut the door to prevent an overtake, leaving the Dutch driver with a choice over whether he had a crash or bailed and lived to fight another day. On this occasion, it was Hamilton who'd given Verstappen that choice, but the Red Bull driver went for a closing gap and ended up having the pretty scary accident which saw the halo come into its own once again and protect the Mercedes driver's head. For this crash, I believe it was a racing incident, as I've said before. Both drivers could have done more to prevent the accident, and it was probably close to a 50-50. But on this occasion, Verstappen probably came off better on the day, given the overall weekend saw him extend his lead in the championship after scoring a couple of points in the sprint qualifying on Saturday. Plus, it was a race in which the Mercedes car was stronger, so it was a particular win for the Red Bull driver. But, having received a 3-place grid penalty for Sochi, Max has probably lost out here on the whole. Had he bailed out of the chicane and gone over the curbs, he could have given the position back to Lewis, and then he could have taken the slipstream through Curva Grande and had another go into the second chicane. After all, he was on much warmer tyres and could have made the move stick. This would have meant he wouldn't be losing out in Sochi and still could potentially have outscored the Mercedes driver in Monza. At worst, Verstappen wouldn't have been far behind Hamilton, and the goal of damage limitation in a race weekend where Mercedes were on top would have been achieved. So this is where there was a longer term decision factor in these incidents, where regardless of your opinion on whose fault it was at the time, Verstappen could have been better off if he just lived to fight another day. It's also worth highlighting that Max is probably going to now take an engine penalty and drop him to the back of the grid anyway, so his 3-place grid penalty wouldn't be an issue. but you never know, the Red Bull car could be far better than the Mercedes around the Sochi Autodrome, which would mean that Verstappen would lose out on this occasion. Should Verstappen change his approach? So should Verstappen change his approach to racing with Lewis Hamilton? Well, for starters, who am I to say how Verstappen should race? I'm just a guy making videos on Formula 1. But if I was in a position to make recommendations for the best drivers in the world, which I'm definitely not, I would say that in Verstappen's aggressive nature, he'll be involved in more incidents like the ones I've mentioned throughout his Formula 1 career, whenever he's in a close title fight. Throughout the season so far, Hamilton's been forced into making some decisions to either keep both drivers going or have a crash. And ever since the British driver has started to become more aggressive back to Verstappen and give the Dutch driver that same choice, he hasn't made those same decisions. I'm not saying one way is more right than the other, but I think there's a lot in saying that you can lose a battle but win the war. For me, Verstappen is doing everything he can to win every battle no matter what, rather than ensuring he minimises his losses when his car isn't on top, and maximising his gains when his car is at its best. I feel like if Verstappen just conceded in some of those moments where a move didn't look particularly likely, then he would benefit in the long run and could easily have found himself with a stronger lead in the championship at this stage of the season had he made some different decisions. So overall, I think that if he did change his approach and be more cautious in those moments, then he would be far more likely to win his first World Championship in 2021. That's my thoughts, but what are yours? Let me know whether you think that a change of approach for Verstappen is needed. And if you enjoyed the video, then make sure to hit the like button, and thanks for watching.